Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I suppose we have people from all over the world watching this video right now. And I'm very thrilled to introduce our guest for today, Andi Locke Mears from the United States. And she has a very interesting template for us, which can help us simplify this very profound science called GHK, very nuanced science, into very accessible and actionable steps. Andy, over to you. I'm not going to waste any time and just walk us through this, and we'll take it as we go.
Thank you so much, Salman. Yes, I appreciate that. And what I want to do to start, and first of all, hello to everyone. It is wonderful to be here. What I'm doing today is sharing this template that I created, and it's an offshoot of one that I have used with my students to help them as they're learning how to use Gemenische Heilkunde in their lives. So let me start with it. I'm going to share my screen so you can actually see it. And I'm going to share also the URL on where you can find it. So if you go to my website, and that's andilockemears.com, and then need answers now is all one word, .html. So my website, andilockemears.com/need answers now.html. And that will take you right to a page that looks like this. And you can access it just by clicking right here. And that's a downloadable PDF. So feel free to take a few minutes to do that if you'd like. If you don't want to, I'm going to be showing it right here. So this is the beginning of the template. Now it's called Need GH Cancers Now for Chronic Symptoms Template. Kind of a long name. Again, it's designed for people to help them in this process, especially if they're new to Germanic New Medicine or Germanische Heilkunde. This does not take the place of working with a consultant or a teacher. It does not. And you do need to know something about Germanische Heilkunde to even use this template. So I want to make that really clear. This isn't something that if you just learned about this work last week and you think you're going to use this template and figure things out, it's not going to happen. This is designed to help you with the studies that you're already doing. All right, so, and this one is for chronic symptoms, which we call hanging healings. All chronic symptoms are chronic, they're hanging, they're not finished, they're just hanging because of what we call tracks. A track is sensory data that is stored in our brain at the moment of the conflict shock. So we're having a conflict shock. Our boss is telling us we're getting fired and we did not expect that. Then what's picking up all around us is the season, the temperature, the barometric pressure, what I just ate, who's standing right next to me, etc. And that is all stored in that circle in the brain or somewhere, and any one of those elements can start the program again. That becomes chronic. So the first thing you want to do, let's say you've got a hanging healing, a chronic condition, and you don't know how to get rid of it, and you're starting to learn Germanische Heilkunde. The first thing you want to do is determine which SBS, which biological program you're running. That's really important to figure out because it's hard to go further without that knowledge. You can, but you have to be pretty good at this. So my advice is to figure out which program is running. And to do that, you need to be familiar with the resources that we have. The best resource we have is the scientific chart book of Germanic New Medicine. I highly recommend you purchase this. It's available from the website of Dr. Hammer's publishing house. And so ask somebody close to you who knows what that might be. Or you can get help from a GHK knowledgeable person, but there are other resources out there as well. So have resources available and know how to use them. The first thing you do is write down your exact symptom or set of symptoms. And maybe you've got one or two, maybe you've got four, maybe you've got 10. Start with the first few that are the most pronounced. I have a runny nose. So you would write down runny nose. Or I have a swollen breast. So you can write down swollen breast. Once you've written down the actual symptoms that you have, you want to figure out, well, what's the body part? And you might think, well, that's easy, but it's not necessarily easy because there can be different germ layers within one organ. And so you have to figure exactly which program, which germ layer has been activated. Now, what that means is that you want to write down on the right side here the body part that is involved with your symptoms. This is where you might want to know some anatomy and physiology or reach out to somebody who knows GHK. If you wrote down you have a runny nose, then the body part that's actually affected is the nasal mucosa. If you have a swollen breast, it's going to be the breast ducts. So there has to be a way to bridge from the left to the right, and you might need some help with that. Salman, does this make sense so far?
It absolutely does. I could
Okay,
actually think of a lot of things that now I know it's hanging healing, and I've been wondering why I've not been able to resolve it completely. I'm looking
perfect.
forward to what you have to share.
Okay, super, thank you. So once you've figured that out, we'll go to step 2 here. Find the correct SBS in the resources or get help figuring that out. And again, it's going to be pretty much what you wrote down here on the right side. It's my nasal mucosa. Step 3, familiarize yourself with the 2 phases of the biological programs, the SBSs. So what happens in the conflict active phase? What happens in the healing phase for the program you are running? And that's where you'd want to look it up in one of the resources to figure that out. If you have a runny nose, nasal mucosa, then we know that that's going to be a cell loss in number 1. And so you can write that down here, cell loss. I've lost cells, cell necroses or cell ulceration in the conflict active phase. Then what happens in PCLA, the healing phase, would be number 2 here. If you had cell loss, you will now have cell replenishment. So you would write that down. Also write down, by looking at your resources, is there anything unusual in the epicrisis? Most epicrises are uneventful. A lot of people get afraid of that. Oh, what's going to happen? Most of them are just what we call centralization. You're going to feel cold. That's it. There are some programs, though, in the ectoderm series here, the ectoderm germ layer, that will be a little bit more dramatic. And there's a few others in addition. So find that out. Read through the resources and find out what's going to happen in my epicrisis so that you know. Write those down. What we're doing here is dispelling the fear. So you know what's happening in your body and what to look for as you move forward. That way you can get out of fear. If you know your epicrisis is going to be painful, then you know, oh, I'm going to have a few minutes of pain. So that when you have pain, you're not freaking out thinking, oh my gosh, what's happening to me? You knew this was going to happen. So breathe, relax, whatever you need to do to get through it. And I will point out, if you need to go to the hospital, then that might be a good thing to do, but you would know that ahead of time. So you would not have to make any sort of snap judgment in that moment. Step 4, determine if your symptoms occur in the PCLA phase, which is the most common, or in the conflict active phase by reading in the resources. The resources will tell you you'll have pain in the conflict active phase. Generally, though, most of the symptoms, 80% of the symptoms, are here in PCLA, which means you've had cell growth, cell loss, and now you're in PCLA and it's going to be cell breakdown or cell replenishment. That comes with symptoms. So most symptoms are here. That's always good to know, though. So let's say one of your symptoms, runny nose, yes, we had cell loss here, and now we have cell replenishment in PCLA, which means it's going to be uncomfortable. So you will have symptoms in PCLA. So that means you know you've already resolved it. But you have a hanging healing, and that's the challenge. Because the next step is you want to develop your timeline. The two phases are always present: conflict active phase and then the healing phase, which consists of PCLA, the first phase, the epicrisis, and the second phase, PCLB. All of this is called the healing phase, the post-conflict phase. So determine your timeline. Your timeline is the single most important thing you can do to figure out how to finish your chronic programs. What was your original conflict shock? You may not think of it right off the bat. What was distressing prior to your symptoms beginning, assuming your symptoms begin in the PCLA phase? So let's say my symptoms started 4 weeks ago. Then I'm going to look at, well, what was before that? Because my conflict active phase, my symptoms here, this is 4 weeks ago. So if I want to find out what my conflict shock was, I have to back up from there. That means just prior to my symptoms starting, I had a solution. I had some relief. I made peace with somebody. We worked it out. So that's the first thing to look at, is that sense of, okay, I'm all right now. And then you go into your healing phase. Look prior to that, though, for this part, your original conflict shock. So if you know this was 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, this was, let's say, just over 4 weeks ago, then your conflict active phase might have been 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks before that. This is where you might want to work with someone to figure out your timeline. How far back should I look? And again, reach out to someone to help you if you need to. Look prior to when your symptoms began. Maybe you had an argument with your spouse, and that was your annoyance conflict, your sense of danger conflict. That would be the nasal mucosa program. Or I couldn't score any goals and my team lost. And that was your annoyance conflict, your sense of danger conflict. Next, you'll want to write down the sensory data associated with your conflict shock. Once you've figured that out, what's the time of year, the temperature, your thoughts, what you ate, your emotions, where you were, who was with you, what you were doing. Any of these can be the track that starts the SBS. So if the whole chronic condition is because of an argument with your spouse, it could be that your spouse is now your track. And every time you see your spouse, you start the program again. This is what you have to determine. Or if it's because your team lost, then it could be that every game that you have that you lose, you start the program again. Or it could simply be thinking about the next game that's coming up that starts the program. This is nuanced. It often takes having a conversation with someone to figure this out. I'm going to stop right there, ask you, Salman, any questions of what I've shared so far?
Let's do it right away. I'm going to share a symptom that I've been experiencing for years now,
Yep.
but I'm not able to trace it to the point how it happened, when it happened. Um, and so it's my scalp psoriasis. I have this flaky head.
Okay.
Um, yeah. And sometimes it just cleans up like completely, like I never had it.
Uh-huh.
And then it just comes back up. And I could never make sense of it. I thought it'll happen if maybe if I take a bath with very hot water, maybe that's going to cause it, or certain kind of foods. So that's the line of thought that I've
Yep.
followed so far. And I've not been able to
Yep.
resolve it. And now, with the introduction of GHK, I know it's separation conflict. I
Yep.
understand that it's something to do with my intellect and thinking and everything, but I haven't, so I never followed a timeline really. But
Okay.
now that you say it, like I just had it like 10 days back, and it was a lot of it, and it's not there right now. And
Yep.
then if I think about what you're just saying, I think I resolved something huge in my life right before that. which was
Correct.
my inability to have an open, authentic conversation with my daughter, because I have, like, she just turned 6 and I have three other children besides her, younger to her, and I always feel like I don't have the time to be with her, to answer all the curious questions she has for me and spend enough time with her. So I'm always thinking. So what I did was I started writing
Oh
stories to her. And within like a week, I wrote some like 80 stories, things that,
my God.
those unfinished sentences, so in the middle of the night, when I wake up to breastfeed a baby and then I can't go back to sleep again, I just end up writing. And it is such a resolve. And I haven't communicated all those things to my daughter in real person.
Right?
But I'm just letting it all out. And
Yes.
that was
Yes.
a huge relief. But now when you're saying it, I'm thinking I have kind of like five unfinished books of sorts. Every time something happens and I start writing, but expressing it is so therapeutic, just
Yeah.
cathartic, that I don't feel like finishing it or doing anything else about it. And
Yeah.
then I just move on with my life. So I
Right.
don't know if
Right.
it's making sense, but like,
Oh,
yeah.
that makes total sense. Absolutely, absolutely sense. So what I love about your story, Salman, is that you resolve it and then it comes back. So that's the easiest kind of chronic condition to figure out because now you're armed, you know you've got to figure out your timeline. The next time it happens, then you're saying to yourself, "Oh, well, what did I just do?" And that's the clue as far as what your track is. And there might be two or three, four or five, there might be 10 tracks, might be just one though. So if you
But
figure out,
what if I'm not able to track down to the original conflict shock?
you
Like,
don't have to.
oh, okay.
You don't have to. If your psoriasis, which are two programs, two separation conflicts, one in the healing phase, one in the conflict active phase. So if psoriasis resolves and you have no more, then you know you solved it, whether you know the original conflict shock or not. So this tells us that you are keeping it alive via your tracks. That once you understand what causes that track that starts it again, now the next time it happens, you can choose something else in that moment. Oh, I'm doing it again. Whatever that thing is, I'm not communicating well with my daughter. What can I do to communicate? Oh, I think we'll go take a walk together and talk, and that's your solution. Pretty soon you won't have to do anything. It's just going to be integrated into your life, and you won't have psoriasis anymore because you won't step on the track. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense, but I'm just thinking, like, I thought just letting it out of your system was enough. So how do I really resolve it for good that it never comes back?
So let me say this. Just letting out of your system can be just fine and it can be enough. And as long as you understand what your track is and you change your relationship to the track, it will never come back.
When you say my relationship with the track, uh, would that mean not feeling guilty about it, not feeling overwhelmed? Is
Correct.
that what you mean?
Correct. So
Okay.
now it's about putting things in place so you don't feel guilty or overwhelmed in your life. Easier said than done, I know. But it doesn't always have to be complicated. It can be very basic. These are biological survival needs. And we often stay isolated with them, right? We don't talk about them to others. They stay inside us, which is why when you write about it, you're opening it up and you're letting it go. So don't be isolated with it. Talk to somebody about it. And sometimes that's all it takes and it disappears.
So does the template only apply to chronic illnesses,
Well,
or
this is what you do with all conflicts, but I'm kind of focusing on this part at least on the chronic condition because of the tracks.
okay.
But the same thing if you have, well, if you have a common cold, you're already done. There's nothing you have to do, but you can do your timeline still. Well, I just solved, a nasal mucosa program, an annoyance conflict. What was it? Now that gives you data on what annoys you and starts this program again, what we would call an allergy. And now you're in the driver's seat. Well, if I know if it's this element in my life that starts it again, what do I do to change my relationship to that element?
So GHK has been very, very transformative in that sense of the word for me in the last couple of months that I've had the blessing of uh, applying it to my life. And with all these four children, and there are so many times that there's just this there's a lot of conflict and chaos, and I'm not able to trace it down. And I feel like I can't afford to fall sick, and I can't have anybody else fall sick in that sense. Like I don't look at sickness that way. I've been
Right.
off medicine for 8 years. My All my children are completely unvaccinated, born naturally, never seen a doctor. They don't even know that are born at the hospital. My daughter has
Yep.
been, has witnessed the birth of all her brothers, siblings. But with the overwhelm that I experience every day. Suppose my daughter's getting a sty on the eye, and she keeps getting those. And now I know with GHK that there's something that she wasn't comfortable looking at, and
Yeah.
it helps me kind of go back what happened a couple of days ago, and I'm able to, okay, I'm sorry that you had to see
Yep.
this, and I just want you to know that we are working on it, and
Yeah.
it helps resolve it, and the
And that
pain
helps.
is gone, and
Right.
yeah, and it's
That's perfect.
so,
That's
so yeah,
exactly
so
what we
uh,
do.
so we can apply this to any kind of illness. It doesn't have to be chronic.
Absolutely. No, I'm just saying this is when I get into tracks here on the second page of it, that deals with chronic. But what I had on the first page is for any biological shock. Oh, look at this little one.
This is Azadi's my third one.
Oh,
Yes.
precious. Let me share my screen again and I will go back. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Let me share something else here. Okay. So this part is what you want to do for any program that you have, any biological program, figure all of this out. When we get into the second, this part is about tracks, the sensory data, that's what you're looking at. Be observant in your life. When are your symptoms better? When are they worse? If they're worse, it means you stepped on a track prior to it and you've solved it. And know that a track can be a conflict active phase for 1 second, and then the next minute, and then 5 seconds later, you sneeze, and that's your epicrisis. It can be a very fast turnaround of the two phases. So you want to be looking at this, be observant in your daily life on when is it better, when is it worse. So you know that when your child comes down with a sty, you're looking before that, okay, what was it that my child did not want to see? And this is what you can help her change her relationship to. So in the examples I gave, maybe it's every time that your spouse isn't happy with you, that's a track. And now it starts the annoyance conflict again, or every time your team loses. Then you want to key into, well, how do I find a biological solution? And so when we look at biology, it means changing your life. It doesn't mean doing the same thing over again and expecting different results. We have to make changes. And a divorce might be a biological solution, but it may not be something we want to do, which is fine. So maybe instead you can talk to your spouse and come to a new agreement on how to communicate effectively. That would be a biological solution as well. If it's your sports team, maybe you change sports teams, or maybe you hire a new coach that will help your team to win. Those are biological solutions. You can also change your perspective. That's also a biological solution. I know my spouse is trying to help me, so I can change how I engage with him or her. So now you're starting to reorient your thoughts. Or I'm an amateur athlete and I play for exercise. So while I'd like my team to win, I'm still achieving my goal of getting exercise. And that helps you let go of that disappointment you have when your team loses. So you are the one who has to put into place how to change your perspective or to find your biological solution. And this would be true whether it's chronic or not. All right. So that's the basis of the template. And I hope that's helpful. I hope it makes sense. And again, here is the URL, needanswersnow.html. And Saman, I want to see if you have any additional questions to see, is that a good wrap up? Does that make sense?
No, I think we should host another session on it because I'm a part of a lot of groups with a lot of mothers on it. Yes, that's Azad. With a lot of mothers in it with young children, and
Yep.
they when they put up something like my baby has been going through this for a very long time, and um, sometimes this spontaneous remission, it's hard for them to believe. How can you really treat chronic illness just like that? And that's something that my husband has also kind of integrated in his healing modality.
Right.
He calls it faith healing, and now he's really using. Just a second.
Yep.
Yes. So he's been using this that people who have had back shoulder pain for 2 decades, and he speaks to them. But what happens a lot of times is um, uh, it's difficult for them to kind of again track it down. But with
Yep.
GHK, there's a physical symptom, so there has to be a definite line. And
Yes.
when he uses that and he says, "Did something like this happen when this first happened to you?" And that really brings them to the state of faith. How do you know this? How do you
Yeah.
know this? And yes, this happened. And then he kind of just sits with them and prays with them, and the
Yep.
pain just goes away,
Yeah. Yeah. That is
just like that.
absolutely possible. It's there. So what that person is doing is connecting all the dots. And when the psyche brain organ is aligned with the mental thinking, then it can be a very spontaneous remission. Dr. Hammer was always looking for that spontaneous remission. And for some people, it's instant. For other people, it might take a couple of days. For others, it might still take a few weeks of work. That would be normal and natural. So, and it's so different for every one of us. But I love what your husband does. That's perfect. That's perfect. That's exactly what we do.
In fact, he wanted to speak with you maybe another time, and he'd love to discuss whatever he has experienced in this field. But have you been using this template already? You mentioned with your students. So if you could just
I've had,
share,
yeah,
share one or two examples.
oh gosh, oh my, I hear them all the time. And I don't know who's actually completing the template. It's all just part of my program that they're in. So but I hear things all the time, GI tract upsets that are just solved. It's like, oh, okay, been chronic, chronic constipation for months, and suddenly they have the solution and the diarrhea, and then it's gone. Once they put all the connections together, all the dots are connected. That's why it often takes a conversation. People think they can often just do this by looking things up, and for some that works, but other people, they need to have a conversation to really key in on, well, what is this? Oh yeah, that did happen. When two people come together, two brains are working on this together, I just see miracles happen. It's amazing.
So I'm saying, like, I've been reading up on psoriasis from a GHK perspective for a few months now, but I could not place it that it, like you mentioned, it's conflict active, but it could also be hanging healing. And so just to be able
So,
to track down which phase are you in is going to make a lot of sense.
so
Yeah.
So that's where I would say don't get bogged down in the details. If you have psoriasis, you have two conflicts going on. One is in the conflict active phase, one is already in the healing phase. That's happening at the same time, which is why it looks different than eczema. It's the scaliness and things that gives it because you've got cell loss and cell replenishment at the same time. So it looks different than your eczema, which is simply a healing phase of the cell loss. Same program, but so, and I would say don't get too bogged down in the details. And I also don't tell people what their conflict shock was about. I'm not going to say to them, oh, you've had this for 3 months? Well, who were you separated from 3 months ago? I never, ever go there because now they're just focused on, oh, who did I separate from? And that's not going to be helpful for them. You want to stay very broad in your
Yes, in
questioning.
fact,
And you want to ask just, well, what was going
yes,
on
this,
in your life 3 months ago? And that's what it is.
yeah. Because a lot of times just going back to that idea makes them so uncomfortable that it triggers something else in them, and they are just not in the headspace to have that conversation anymore. Yeah.
Could be, yeah. But I don't get specific. I stay very broad. Oh, this has been going on for 5 years. What happened 5 years ago? That's all we need to focus on. Yes. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful for everybody. Salman, I want to thank you so much for sharing your input here and asking some really great questions. Thank you so, so much. And thank you also to the Global GHK Foundation for putting on these wonderful videos and recordings and the celebrations that they put on many times a year. It's very valuable to our whole world as we all learn this amazing work together. So thank you for everyone, and I hope everyone has a great day, evening, afternoon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.